So I thought I'd show you my editing process for wedding videos today. I had a few requests from my last upload, so I thought I'd finally get around to it and actually record this sort of editing process video. I've been meaning to do this for the last few weeks, but I just got super busy with work and I also just needed a bit of a break. So I've had a few weeks rest and I'm ready to do more in the way of YouTube and hopefully be a bit more consistent in my uploading. So firstly, off the bat, I just want to say that I don't think of myself as the best editor, far from it. I'm not pretending to be. I just thought I'd showcase my process. It works for me and I've kind of been refining it for the last few years and I'm generally pretty happy with it. So hopefully this is of interest. I'm sure there's things that I do that people will find ridiculous and hopefully things that I do that maybe might be of interest. But without further ado, let's jump into my editing system of choice, which is Adobe Premiere. And I can already hear screams of horror that I'm not using DaVinci Resolve. And honestly, Premiere just works better for me. I've used it for the last sort of 12 to 13 years now. And from my experience, it's been great. I know the cost of Adobe is kind of high, but I just don't really have a want or desire to change editing systems at this point. First things first, I'm going to jump in here and show you what my template looks like. So I've got a few different sequences. I've got my highlights sequence, got my ceremony and speeches sequences. I've also got an extended highlights, which is really only for those who booked my platinum package. That's sort of a 16 to 20 minute film, which is basically the exact same as the highlight sequence, just longer. And then I've also got a preview, which is like 20 seconds, which is usually what I do sort of a day or two after the wedding. And then I've also got a vertical sequence, which I convert the preview to vertical for sharing on things like Instagram and TikTok. All right, so I'm actually going to show you a different wedding to the behind the scenes that I shot. This one I actually shot the next day. And I think in terms of the edit, it's my favorite one I've done this year. So I thought this would be a really good one to showcase. It also had fireworks, which was a bit different. So yeah, I thought I'd show that one rather than the one I shot last time. So the very first thing that I do, usually a day or two after, is I'll create the preview. So I've got a bin where I've got around about 19 clips here, which I'll kind of whittle down to sort of 10 or 11. When I'm actually importing the footage, the first thing I'll do, whenever I shoot high frame rate, I know I'm going to slow it down. The first thing I'll do is go through all the frame rates and convert all the 100 FPS stuff down to 25% speed. Same with the 50, I'll convert it. Same with the 50, I will slow it down to 50%. Once I've done all that, I'll then sort it by creation date, so it's generally in the order it was shot. I'll bring it into the timeline, and then I'll highlight the whole lot, right-click, set to frame size, because some of it is actually shot in 1080p, which I know, horrifying. I'll get onto the reason why I shoot some of it in 1080p a bit later. I'll then right-click, unlink, delete all the camera audio, because I know I'm not going to use that, and then I'll start adding telemetry controls to all the footage. And then on these darker blue ones, these are the drone ones. So I don't know how it's happened, but Premiere can recognize that these drone files are different. So that's that's a new thing. I don't know how it recognizes it, but it does. That's really useful, so I can see what is drone footage. I've actually got a preset here, which basically converts the drone footage to near enough what the Cinelight D looks like on the Lumix cameras. So I'm not shooting in Vlog, I'm shooting in Cinelight D. That just saves me a process, so it's just a little flatter than Rec 709, easy enough to grade, and it means I don't have to shoot in 10-bit, I can shoot in 8-bit, which I actually do quite a lot. I'll go over that a bit more when I get to the main highlight sequence. But yeah, so it's all Cinelight D, and then on the drone stuff, it's D Cinelight. What you'll probably know with the drone is if I take the preset off, it's much flatter than Cinelight D on the Lumix. So this just brings it a bit closer, and then once I actually add my grade to it, it cuts together pretty well. I'll also explain a bit more detail in a bit about my crop marks and my adjustment layer, which is my look, in a sec. But for now, this is basically what the preview looks like, so I'll roll that now. So that's basically what they would receive as a preview in standard widescreen. What I also do is I'll then copy and paste the sequence in here into a vertical timeline, paste that in, and I'll basically just reframe everything to fit a vertical frame for things like Instagram, TikTok, that sort of thing, as I showed you with the template. Now what you'll immediately see here is that I've had to shrink the video down quite a bit to fit her walking down the aisle and actually have him in. But what I don't like is cropping in, just to a vertical full frame and then losing so much detail on the side. So where it calls for it, in most of these shots, I can actually just get away with it, but every now and then I will zoom it out a bit more, and then I've got a white color mat underneath just so it's not like black and it looks like it's meant to be that way. So the good thing about doing a vertical video preview as well as the regular one is you've instantly got content that you can put on your Instagram page. So I always check the couple first, but 9 times out of 10 they're happy for me to upload it directly. I will then upload it, add them as collaborators so it still shows up on their page, but it's hosted from my page. And then usually by doing collaborative posts, I'll normally get sort of 3,000 to 5,000 views per reel, which is really nice. It gets seen around, and actually from doing these preview reels pretty much a day or two after the wedding, capitalizing on that very new hype of people getting married, you often find that the reel can do quite well, and then you get other people going, oh, I saw your reel on Instagram at this venue that I'm getting married at, like, we love your stuff, we want to book you. I've had that happen quite a few times, so it's really valuable and really worthwhile doing this. So I'll go over export settings in a bit, but right now I'm going to show you the next stage, which is doing the ceremony and speeches recordings. You can see here that I've got the ceremony and speeches already edited. When they're edited, I can then highlight it, copy and paste it into the highlights sequence, and basically just chop bits out of the ceremony and speeches edits, and it's already done then. It's already synchronized, it's already generally sort of color corrected. So it makes it really easy to include stuff from the ceremony and speeches in the main video. Now, in terms of actually putting together the ceremony and speeches, I'm just going to show you sort of basically what I do now. So I'll bring in, I've already got a few here. So I've got my main angle, my backup angle, and I've got a couple of different audio sources. Now this isn't all of them, I'm just putting a few on here to show you what I do. All of these green ones come from Sony TX650s. So in total, I've actually got 4 for this ceremony. I've got one on the groom, I've got one on the registrar, on the sister, I think, who was doing the reading, and I've also got one that sits on the table, which is to capture things like the harpist or any music playing, and also things like applause, because taking that from the camera audio can be a bit inconsistent, and also taking it from things like the groom's mic can be a bit dodgy because they end up pulling each other close for a kiss, so when they're kissing it just sounds muffled. And then things like the registrar, well, she'll be clapping, so you just get one really loud clap sound. So I always have an ambient mic just on the table just that I can cut to for things like that. I've already got presets made for the TX650, so it's literally called Audio Wedding. I'll drag it onto there. We've got equalizer, which is just vocal enhancement. I've got a bit of a boost on the bass, and then I've also got a hard limiter just in case things get a bit too loud. And generally speaking, I found this to work pretty well. Once that's all in, I highlight these clips, right click and synchronize, give it a minute. Once that's synced up, I'll then add telemetry controls to the video, do a little bit of color correction on each angle. That's not the best actually. So make sure it's looking all right. Once I'm happy with that, I'll select all the video clips, right click and nest, right click on the nested clip, multi-camera, enable, and boom, you've got a multi-camera clip. I will then also delete these 2 camera audio files. So I'm just using the audio from the TX650 because that's all I'm really going to want to use. And that's really it. I'll cut between different angles like you can see here. I've only got 2 angles on the speeches, so I'm just cutting between sort of close, sort of medium close and a wide here. And then, yeah, I'll just export that. So once I've done the preview and the ceremony and the speeches, I usually leave it maybe a week or 2 before I start trying to attempt the main highlights edit, because that's going to take some time. So first thing I'll do is I'll import all the footage that I've shot first. I'll do the same thing again like I did with the preview, where I'll slow down all the high frame rate stuff to the desired speed, so it's just all ready to go. And then if I decide that it's too slow, I can speed it up. And then again, I will go over to creation date. Now, if you can't see creation date, right click meta display, go to basic and enable creation date. This basically means I put everything in order that was shot onto the timeline. I'll then highlight everything, and I'll go right click, set to frame size, because we got some stuff in 1080p. Now, the reason I shoot some stuff in 1080p is purely because the Lumix S5 II and S5 IIX can't do 4K 100 or 120. So we have to go down to 1080p, which is fine by me. The bitrate's reasonable enough. It also doesn't crop in, which in 4K 50 it does. So actually sometimes I want the full sensor width. So I will go to 1080p, 100 frames a second, which I'm quite happy with. If you pixel peep, you can probably tell the difference, but most people can't tell the difference. And actually, when you're just sat back watching on a TV, you really can't notice it unless you look closely. So I'm quite happy using the 1080p option. The next job is to then right click and unlink, because I'm not going to use any of the camera audio. All the stuff that's on here will just be video only. Everything that I'm going to use that's synchronized will already be in my ceremony and speeches sequence, so I can just copy that over when I'm ready for it. The rest of it will just be, visual stuff. Now I'll take out things like the ceremony angles and the speeches, that sort of thing, and just leave effectively all the highlights footage that's not ceremony and speeches. Sometimes I will literally just start editing like this, rather than going through like this and going, oh, do I want that clip? No, yes or no, drag it into the timeline. I kind of just like to be able to scrub through the timeline and look at all the footage and then just sort of select what I want, and then I'll just move things along. So let's say I'll leave a bit of space here. I know that I've got a load of bridal prep stuff here, so I'll just start picking out clips and putting them to one side. However, when like with this wedding, I had 2 shooters, it's just too much. If it's just stuff I've shot, I generally shoot for the edit, so I know that I can pretty much put it in the order that I shot. But when you've had 2 videographers, that's when you can't not cull, or you can, but it'll be a nightmare. So that's when I start to cull and organize, because I've got 2 here. So I'm just going to show you my culled footage folder here. So I've got 10 subfolders basically that range from B-roll and drone to bridal prep and all that sort of stuff. Once I've gone through all the shots, gotten rid of the ones that I know I'm not going to use, organized stuff into folders. Once I'm happy with that, that's when I'll start to bring in everything into the timeline sort of in chunks, so folder by folder. Again, at this point, I'll have already set the frame rate of everything I want. So B-roll I'll put there, and then I'll bring in, all the bridal prep stuff and put it there. And I can then just scrub through and decide where I want to put things. At this stage, I'll also, again, like I did with the preview, I'll be adding Lumetri color controls to all this footage. On the drone stuff, I know I'm going to need to add, the presets to make it match close enough to Cine Light D. That's what it looked like before. A little bit too grey and washed out. You add a little bit more in. Once you add the look and the adjustment layer, then it all matches pretty well. I could probably do more to fine tune this, and I have been the last few months, but for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how close this sort of preset gets with what I do. Now, before I start doing anything else, the other thing that I'll do, let's just bring them back over, is I will start to select bits from the ceremony and the speeches.
May not be joined.
So I'll need these vowels bits here, and then the same with things like the speeches. So I'll bring that over, and I'll basically just go through and pick out, little sections that I like, and then maybe the groom says something something here, and then I'll splice that with like a sentence later, as long as it's the same vein of what he was saying. I don't like to kind of completely butcher it. I like to cut out the ums and ahs, and I prefer to have it more like a movie trailer voiceover, where it's a very deliberate like couple of lines, rather than including lots of ums and ahs and lots of laughing and awkward jokes. With my edits, I don't really like to include lots of humor. It doesn't really suit my style, so I don't. I tend to go for the more kind of direct, just what I call nice lines. Every now and then I will include something humorous if it fits, but for the most part, like the best man wishing the couple all the best, or the father of the bride giving some advice, or the groom saying, oh, when I saw you for the first time, I was in tears. That sort of thing. I prefer to include that, even if I have like an upbeat and fun edit, I still prefer the feel of it being not serious, but just not weirdly jokey. Like a lot of the best man speech, I probably won't be able to use, or I probably wouldn't use, because it just, it's mostly jokes at the groom's expense, and it's just like, you're going to get the recording of that. And for me, my style, I don't really like to include that. So yeah, that's kind of why I tend to use a bit less of the speeches than maybe other videographers might. So I basically waffled a lot about the shot choices and how I kind of, choose things. I'm going to go through the edit for Tyler and Stacey's video now, and you can kind of see how I've set things up, why I've done things the way they are, and hopefully this will be useful and interesting, and you can kind of see, you know, how I like to do things. Again, some of the stuff I do might seem a bit weird, or it might seem great. I don't know. All I can say is it works for me. The two things I haven't gone over yet are the crop bars and my adjustment layer. So I'm just going to take them both off for now first. So the crop bars are really just there as a guide, because I will actually physically crop the video when it comes to exporting. So their main 4K video will be at 3840 by 1600. So actually that's UHD technically, but the same thing. I will also do a 1080p version with the bars actually imposed, just for easy sharing on, like, you know, people still share on Facebook and that sort of thing. The reason I like cropping to CinemaScope, ideally I'd shoot on anamorphic, but I don't have any, and I'm not sure it'd be as practical as using, you know, the lenses that I use. If you watch any of my short films or anything like that, I generally have always chosen to use CinemaScope like 2.39 or 2.4 to 1 ratio. The practical thing though is that you can reframe slightly. Let's take this shot here, this opening shot. Now I've got the adjustment layer off, I'll put it back on in a second. Let's say I wasn't happy with the framing. Let's say there's too much headspace. Well, I can just simply adjust the height position and reframe it slightly. So it actually gives me, if you take off the marker, you can actually see there's quite a lot of room to adjust things if you want them. So I quite like that as an option, especially a lot of the time I do have a tendency of giving too much headroom, so I can adjust it if I need to. So next up is the adjustment layer. Now, I'm not gonna go over this in too much detail. There's a few things going on here. I try and keep my colors fairly true to life. I don't like to kind of do anything too crazy with it. Most of what's going on here is sort of a custom S-curve, with a slight lift in the shadows, just a slight one. It used to be a lot higher, but it looked a bit, you know, film fade's kind of not the thing anymore. But I still like a little bit of something to preserve the details in the shadows. I'll also adjust a few things like saturation and vibrance, just to bring things looking natural. And then something I do with the greens, just because when you do S-curves and stuff, you tend to find the greens pop a bit too much. So I've actually got a green kind of reduction on the luma as well as the saturation. So greens tend to be a bit muted, but not unlifelike, if that makes sense. I try and keep it true to life, kind of. The big thing here that I'm using is with Film Convert, I'm using a Kodak Vision 3 look, and I've customized it to fit everything else. And generally speaking, I'm really happy with the look. I'll do a few befores and afters as I go along, and you'll be able to see sort of the difference it makes. Let's actually go through the way I've done things, and then I'll explain a few last minute bits as well that have sort of helped me pull things together. So normally I'd start with a drone shot like this, just to set the scene, which is, again, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but I like kind of a slow burn, sort of go, oh look, we're in a place, and then it becomes more apparent where the place is. However, with this one, I actually decided to start like this. So they had fireworks that evening, and there was so much footage of it. I just thought, actually, it's sometimes nice to do a little preview of the evening at the start before you fade in to the main bulk of the video. I used on-camera audio, which I kind of wish I had better quality audio. There's a woman screaming right next to the camera, and I didn't have an on-camera microphone at that point because I didn't think I was going to need it. So this is a lesson, you know, for the future. For the most part, I don't use on-camera audio, but every now and then you kind of want it. Anyway, we then move forward, as I would with most of my wedding videos. So an opening drone shot just to kind of set the scene. There's just a look at Clevedon, which is where the venue is. And then we cut to a slow motion shot of the couple. Now I agree, slow motion's been done to death, so I actually literally just use it for couple shots and confetti. Everything else is just at normal frame rate. But I always prefer to have the couple shots look more dreamy. They're almost meant to feel a bit like a dream, so I like to shoot those in high frame rate. And it also means I can extend it out if the film requires it. I use very similar titles most of the time. It's just a nice fade in with a serif font. The spacing is done by literally pressing the space bar. I actually set the spacing in Essential Graphics, but it meant everything was slightly offset because it basically included a space after each letter. So it's actually physical spaces between each letter. And then, yeah, okay, we cut to shots of the venue and the grounds and a few detail shots. They're cutting in pretty well. Like, obviously, it's you can tell it's some drone shots and some ground shots, but they match together pretty well. And again, this is what it looks like without the grade. This is what it looks like with the grade. So the color shift isn't mad. It's slightly warmed up, but nothing crazy. Mostly contrast, and then like film effect without the grain. I've taken the grain off because when you put on YouTube or anything but like Vimeo, and I don't really like using Vimeo because it's expensive, the grain turns to mush. So I ended up turning off grain entirely, which I was sad to do, but it's just, you know, it's easier to not have it on. And then this shot, the reason why it's cropped the way it is because you can see my bag there, and I didn't catch that. Once the AI removal stuff is implemented around, I'll probably be removing a lot more things like that. But for now, it worked fine just to crop it a bit, because actually this is the central focus anyway.
My love, Stacey, from the moment I met you.
So then I'm using, because I did personal vows, that's what I decided to use as kind of like the sort of lead up to the ceremony. They just did, their vows were fantastic, and actually I used most of it. I only cut out a little bit just for the sake of flow. So I used most of each of theirs, and I did kind of a cut back and forth basically between the two. So I'm going to skip through some of this voiceover stuff because it's quite long, and I wanted to mention a few things. Firstly, when I edit visually first and then try and find audio to fit. Now, sometimes it doesn't work and you have to do it the other way. Generally speaking, I'll get the visual clips that I want in place first, and then if I feel there's some audio that will fit, then great. A lot of the times I just won't have any audio, because actually I do stand by less is more. Like, I personally, for my style, I don't like just constant speaking of the speeches throughout, because actually every now and then you'll get a really good speech, but for the most part there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't really flow very well. So I'd rather have odd little lines here and there, with the exception of something like this where they had really carefully written out vowels, which that was all so usable. So I've actually muted the vowel now, but it basically goes through the whole of this section here. And then here, I actually ended up cutting between two different locations, because the bridal prep started in this kind of house just off to one side before they moved to the main house around about like 11 o'clock. And actually the room where the bride was getting her makeup done wasn't this room here. It was actually next door, and it didn't look that great. The lighting was a bit dodgy. So I ended up using these shots that Jenny, my wife, who was second shooting, got, and it worked. It cuts together quite nicely. Like, that lighting looks a lot nicer than some of the other stuff, which I won't show you because it just didn't look that great. And again, this is before and after. So again, generally true to life colors, just warmed up a bit and contrasty in filmic look. And then the other thing of note as well, which again is something that I've noticed since delivering this, is I probably got the film halation a little bit too high. You can probably see just a bit too much of a glow going on there. It probably needs to be down a little bit, and that's actually what I've done going forward. I've just reduced it a little bit because it was just a bit too intense. We then cut to the bride's vows, and then that's one of these shots of the groom getting ready, which again I would have done anyway, and I'd actually done that already before I found this footage, and I basically fit the audio in with what was going on screen, and then every now and then I fit in a few extra shots if I can't find the right thing. So it's a bit of a back and forth, but yeah, I'm visual over audio personally. Like this shot, I wouldn't normally have used couple portraits this early, apart from with the title, just with the way I do things. In this occasion, I needed something to fit in, so I decided to use a couple shot that I might have used later on otherwise.
Me to achieve my brightest.
I vow for our marriage to become our sanctuary.
So we cut back to the groom, and I like to have the groom speaking over when the bride's on screen, and the bride speaking over when the groom's on screen generally, because it's kind of got that kind of back and forth thing going on. And then she had, I think, about 3 first looks. So she had her grandparents, and then her dad came in straight after from the same angle, and it just cut together really weirdly. So I actually used this shot that I think, it wasn't even Jenny, it was Adam who shot my previous behind the scenes. He was shooting behind the scenes for Paul the photographer. I just asked him to get this one shot because I had to go down and set up, and Jenny was helping. It was a really busy day. So he got this shot, and the shot angle is so different that cutting back to the dad doesn't feel awkward. And I'll talk about that again when I do dance floor stuff, like cutting to different enough angles so it doesn't feel like an awkward jump cut, especially when you're doing sort of more film-based stuff, you know, narrative-based. I would consider this narrative, because the narrative is couple get married, even though it's not fiction. There is a narrative going on, and you know, you want to try and follow it as you would a film, and it can feel really jarring if you have weird like jump cuts, unless it's like meant to be the case. So I generally try not to have like jump cuts unless I can't help it.
Excited to walk this journey with you as my wife.
And again, lighting here, a little dodgy. I'm slightly colorblind, so it's not exactly right, but it's close enough. This was particularly orangey lighting. So I basically just turned down the saturation on the orange, which made them kind of more peachy. It's one that I probably could have spent more time fixing, but I was happy enough with it. And also something to note as well, throughout a lot of the day, the sky, especially once the sun got down a bit, because it was hazy all day, there was quite a pinky look to it. So I wasn't too worried about that. And then we cut to the ceremony now. A little overexposed there, so I probably could have turned down. In fact, I should have just done a little bit of that. There we go. See, you notice these things when you watch things back through, even though you've watched it 20 times before. And now I bring in the last little bit of the bride's personal vows.
I promise to be someone you can always rely on. I will always be here to love you wholeheartedly and bring you comfort.
So I'm basically just trying to show as much of the family members and like important members as I can. It's not necessarily the easy thing to do in the ceremony before they start, so I'm not worrying too much. But again, I just like to make sure I've got lots of shots of people. A lot of the time the couple really want to just see their guests and see the bits that they would have missed. So my priority is just people, the characters as it were, if you're talking in film terms. Got the drone in the sky for this shot. Again, big thanks to Paul for suggesting that. I probably would have been too nervous to do that. It was a very full-on day, so I didn't think to do that. And he was like, get it in the air. I was like, okay. And actually it turned out great. So thank you, Paul, for that suggestion. Again, you can see here, I'm trying to avoid just jump cutting because it just feels a bit awkward. However, now what I do, instead of cutting between these angles, which can still feel a little awkward, I'll keep the same angle. I will do a jump cut, but I do crossfades, which feels a bit more natural, feels a bit more kind of like a kind of emotional movie montage. It's a little bit 90s and 2000s, but I think it's coming back a little bit. I'm seeing crossfades definitely coming back. So that's kind of my new go-to for that sort of thing. And then finally, we have a longer shot for the bride coming down the aisle. She's still finishing her personal vows here.
In any version of reality, I'd find you and I'd choose you.
For the actual vows, I don't include what the registrar says. I just include the couple's lines. So I, so-and-so, take you, so-and-so, to be my love or whatever. To hide the jump cuts, I then just include a portrait shot.
Norton, take you, Stacey Lynn Brown, to be my wedded wife.
I, Stacey Lynn Brown, take you, Tyler Anthony Norton, to be my wedded husband.
So that's kind of how I like to do that. And then I'll include a little line from the registrar to say, hey, look, you're married. And then I'll include this applause in a second here. And I very slowly fade that out as the music comes back in, so you can still just about hear it. Now, I'm going to mention something that I do now for audio, which I do for everything now, just to keep it nice and sort of uniform. I'll now do all my voiceovers from anything from the couple readings all on one track, save for things like applause, and I'll export just that audio from that track. Then I take it into, you may have heard of it already, it's Adobe Podcast AI. So basically drop the audio into here, select probably about the 90% default option, and then I'll bring it back in and line it up. I normally have to boost it a few dB, but basically what that does, aside from changing the sound to sound fuller, the actual reason I like it is it normalizes all the audio. So if you've had to boost the bride's audio and she's still speaking quietly, or if you've had someone speaking really loudly, you find it normalizes it a lot better than running tons of presets and plugins and stuff, manually doing it yourself. The podcast AI is not perfect by any means, but it works quite well. And I use it for most things when it comes to wedding videos and sort of voiceover and stuff. Obviously, if you just got audio that just sounds great out the bat, which sometimes these TX650s can do, but 9 times out of 10, they need a bit of work done to them. And actually, I found the Adobe Podcast AI just normalizes everything. Every now and then it misses a word, so you might have to fade things in, but I find it's just super consistent. It makes everything sound really nice and clean, and as if you've actually had someone recording a voiceover in a sound booth or something. So going back, I then have slow motion shot of the exit, and we've got confetti. And then lastly, we will then use, I think, normally either the confetti or the group shots to transition into the next music track. Here's where I like to use, lots of candid shots and really show, the guests just enjoying themselves. For me, that's one of the most important parts of just having a little montage of candids, because people want to see their guests, as I said. I think that's, at least for what I'm booked for and what my clients like, I know they like to see their guests, and I try and show as many as I can. Once in a blue moon, I'll be asked to remove a shot for whatever reason, but 9 times out of 10, people are like, oh, I'm really glad you included this shot of Auntie Barbara or something. And I'll be like, I didn't know who that was, but I just film as many people as I can. It's helpful to do that, but sometimes you don't always manage to get those candid shots. So the next solution is to shoot the group shots, which I'll get to in a bit. Also in here, and I'll just play a little bit of it now, I start to use lines from the speeches and intercut them throughout this sort of second section. Because again, I generally prefer to use speeches after the ceremony, not before, unless I've got nothing else to use.
Obviously, we'd like to thank everyone for coming today and to enjoy this special day with Tyler and Stacey.
And again, I'll just show you quickly, this is before and after the grade. So again, contrasty, filmic, it's, you know, still, you can still see it's fairly true to life colors, just more contrast basically.
I'd like to also say how beautiful Stacey looked today.
All right, and this shot, thinking about it, I kind of wish I'd gone to a wide. This guy, not his fault, I had it all lined up and it was great, and then he just shuffled partway through the speech, and I'm like, and I didn't notice it because I was much more focused on the dad who was speaking. And then I suddenly noticed partway through, as he's saying these good lines, I'm like, damn, he's in my shot. So I've just had to use it. I kind of wish now I'd used the wide shot, but again, this happens sometimes. And when you're trying to keep to a deadline but still produce good quality work, you can miss things. And I bet you every videographer has missed odd little bits and bobs and be like, oh, damn, wish I'd done that. But hey, look, it's good to sort of critique our own work and actually look at where we can do better.
Today, I am really proud of her. I'd like to welcome Tyler, obviously, into our...
So moving on to the next bit, I think the next person to speak is the sister. Now I actually cut in here some detailed shots of the room. I'll do a mixture of slow gimbal shots and tighter handheld shots. The couple like to see, you know, the setup, especially if they spent a long time, you know, designing it and coming up with flowers and very specific, you know, silverware and glasses and table decorations. I try and show a few shots of that as a good summary of the wedding. I also use it as a transition to go into group shots.
Stacey, you're my role model, best friend and sister all in one. And Tyler, I can speak for everyone.
So again, the thing with group shots, they're not the most exciting, but they are the best guarantee of capturing the important guests, you know, like grandparents that you may not have, you know, clocked a grandparents, or, you know, if you haven't figured out who's the parent yet, because sometimes for whatever reason it's not super obvious. So I always include a small section of group shots, which is just, you know, again, shot at regular speed, nothing particularly fancy going on here. And then actually with this one, because the bride's sister's speaking, I did decide to include a shot of her as well.
And I hope you love growing old with Stacey as much as I loved growing up with her.
So I thought it was quite a nice line. I also like to include now, this is something I started doing recently, which is shots of guests actually going and sitting down. I tend to do, you know, slow moving shots, just, you know, something a bit different. We've got the best man speaking here and then the couple enter in. I thought that just worked quite nicely for this bit.
Perfect for each other. Please do raise your glasses for the new Mr. and Mrs. Norton.
And again, normally I would have used the tight shot. Obviously you can see Paul in the shot there, but actually I wanted to show the guests, you know, raising their glasses. It's a good job they didn't stand, because I tell you what, when they say please be upstanding, you can't see anything unless you've got your camera up like 7 or 8 feet high, which isn't always very practical. So yes, I'm definitely in favor of the raise your glasses, not be upstanding, but obviously I'm the videographer, I can only do so much.
Mr. and Mrs. Norton.
And then lastly, I'll do basically a montage of some of the couple shots. Again, this is very much as it happened. That's not to say everything is in perfect order, it isn't, and I'll kind of put things in sort of sections. I don't like to cut back and forth too much, because I think it can be a bit jarring, a bit too montagey. I think I mentioned earlier something that I was taught doing film production in university. It was, a film's got to make sense without dialogue. So I try and have it be a very visually focused video and then complement it with voiceovers and then with music. To be honest, I find the music choice more important than the voiceovers. Like, you know, I think if the music was wrong, you just lose the right feeling, you know, so actually music choice is super important. It is also important to have some voiceovers, they do really elevate it, you know, they're kind of the icing on top. If you imagine the sort of the course or B-rolly footage is like your main cake, and then you've got your music as kind of like the bit in the middle, and then the voiceovers are like the icing on top. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Stacey, you're the most amazing person I've ever met. Standing here today with you is something I've really been wanting to do for a long time.
So again, finished off with the groom doing one final voiceover. And then lastly, I use these shots to transition into the final section, which is the evening, which has got a more upbeat sound. And she wanted very Bridgerton vibes. That's why it's got this kind of strings-based music. So I'm just going to move it along here. We've got a few odd bits and bobs here, cake cutting, and then I'm just going to show you the sort of dancing. Now, there wasn't a first dance at this point, that happens a bit later, but I still need to capture the dancing, and I'll show you kind of what I was trying to do and what I always try to do with my dance floor stuff. Now, something I didn't mention is I normally have a general rule with shot length, and I like it to be at least 1.5 seconds, between 1.5 to 3 seconds long, generally speaking, with the exception of, like long sweeping shots if there's something specific. But if it's just a normal kind of cut shot that I cut to the beat like I normally do, yeah, I try and keep them, like these shots are all just under 2 seconds long, which I think is enough time. Any much less than that, it starts to go by too quickly. And then, for standard highlights, if it's going much longer than sort of 4 seconds, it gets a bit dull, especially if it's just like a static shot. If there's a lot of movement going on in one shot, then it can be a bit more interesting. But if you just got like a long handheld static-y shot of flowers, it gets really boring. So generally my rule of thumb is to have it a couple of seconds per shot. But with the dancing, because there's so much energy, I try and have it 1 to 1.5 seconds per shot, as you'll see here. Now what you'll see is I like to cut to a lot of different angles to make it look like there's a lot more going on than there is. And like it's all going on at one time. So you'll see here, dance floor's not that big. There's, what, 15, 20 people on the dance floor? But I've got lots of these different shots to make it look like there's a lot more going on all at the same time, and it's a lot bigger of a dance floor. So, cutting to close-ups, to a different close-up, to sort of medium shot here, all different angles, changing all the time, when in actual fact, I'm moving around 3 different positions and just sort of panning around. But when you kind of montage cut it this way, at least for dance floor stuff, it looks like there's a lot going on. And then when I film as well, I think I showed a bit in my behind the scenes video, I also like to kind of move a bit with the music just to add a bit more energy. As you'll see in basically any video that I do, I always keep 180-degree shutter, and I think it just makes things look really natural and filmic. No dissing to anyone who cranks a shutter, and to be honest, you don't get color casting and it's probably a bit easier, but I don't like cranking the shutter. I just don't like it. I way prefer the look of natural motion blur, so I'll always choose to use an ND filter and deal with the color cast, or if I shoot in 50 frames a second, then I will always slow it down so it's still got 180-degree shutter. That's just my preference, and I think it just gives a really natural looking sort of energy and motion blur. And then the last bit of this, before I finish up, is we then did an outdoor first dance, which led into the fireworks, as you saw at the beginning of the film. So in terms of lighting it, where it cuts there, you'll see there, so I've got it was just a panel light at this point. I've now got a Fresnel light, which would have been more kind of focused. But again, I don't like to light things head on. It just looks super flat. Even if you've got very soft lighting, I prefer to have things off at an angle or shoot it sort of semi-backlit so you get sort of shape and shadow. And there was enough other light sources that this worked really quite well. And this drone shot I was so pleased with. So you can just about see them there. I think it's about ISO 1600, so it's not especially high, but we're at f1.7. I just wanted to get to expose for the light here and maybe the lights in the window. So it's almost looking a bit mysterious. And then you'll see in the following shots, when she goes in and then it cuts to the wide shot and you get the fireworks. And this sound effect was not from the camera, this is from Artlist, and I kind of did my best to line it up. And I think it works quite well. And then when you cut to the wide shot here, you really get to see, the level of the fireworks that they actually had going on. So yeah, overall, really pleased with that. And then it just ends on one final shot here. So that's the film, that's kind of the editing process. The last thing I'm just going to show you quickly is my export settings. Now I actually do 3 exports, one of which I haven't been doing for a little while, just because I kind of keep forgetting. The one I keep forgetting to do, which I need to go back and do, is I get rid of the CinemaScope bars and I'll actually export a 16:9 ProRes LT version, which I can use for you know, promotional stuff, website stuff. Basically, if I want to create new montages, then I've got a really high quality file and I don't have to keep pulling from the raw files because eventually I will delete them. So I've already got a preset for ProRes 4K. Now, the actual client delivery is H.264 MP4 because that is a really universal format. It's really easy to play on everything. So I've got presets here for a few different things. So 4K CinemaScope, I have it set to 3840 by 1600, just 2.4 by 1, nice and straightforward. I always render at maximum depth and quality just for the, I want to see for the sake of it. Profile is high and unrestricted. It's probably a bit overkill, to be honest, but you know, I'd rather that than have things, you know, inconsistent. And then lastly, I have the bitrate set to constant. I don't like variable bitrate because it ends up just ruining sort of dark scenes, especially with these fireworks. It would end up going, oh, there's not much going on, I'll just, you know, have a lower bitrate, and then you'd end up seeing super blocky stuff. And I have the target bitrate set to 50, which I think is a really good middle ground between super high quality and sensible file size. So that means that the output file size for video delivery to clients, the full size version is usually 2.5, 3 gigabytes for a sort of 7-minute film. And then I'll also give them a super compressed version in 1080p, which is like 8 megabits a second, and that's like under 500 meg. So if they want to easily download or upload, or their internet's worse than mine, my internet's pretty bad, it just means they've got a really easy to use compressed file format as well as a full quality one. And I think that's about it. The only other thing I'll mention is in terms of client delivery, I'm not using VidFlow or EasyFlix. I just use Dropbox. And it's not necessarily the best presentation, but for me, it's never let me down. I've never had any issues with clients being able to access or download stuff, and it's never like gone down for me or stopped working. So I'm going to keep using Dropbox for what I'm paying for it and the storage I'm actually getting. I'm not having to pay for credits or anything. It works for me, and I don't think I'm going to change that. And it just, you know, I'd rather have a good, straightforward, stable option rather than have something that looks really nice that can maybe not be the most reliable or compresses things itself. Because I know some of these sites will have, you know, you can download full quality or partial quality, but I'd rather have full control over how I'm compressing my footage, even if it's 1080p 6 megabits a second. I would rather be the one who has final control over export settings, if that makes sense. Anyway, this has been a long video. I probably had to cut out a load of stuff, so I hope this was interesting. This is actually the second time I've had to record this, so hopefully this came out okay. If this was interesting, please do be sure to like and subscribe. I've actually got a few things already in the pipeline that I'm editing at the moment, so I'm hoping to be uploading things sort of once every week or every other week. Check in again, and hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.